Some huge things happening in Wyoming. It's fun. It's been so much fun to watch from afar. I'm in lowly Minnesota here, but Wyoming is up to things. They're doing things that conservative folks, liberty lovers all across the country have been clamoring for, have been demanding from their state legislators. So, joining me today is Wyoming State Freedom Caucus Director Jessie Rubino. Jessie, how are you?
Hey Eric, thanks so much for having me. It's an awesome day in Wyoming, as it always is. I think that we're the greatest state in the union. So thanks for having me on to talk about what's going on here.
Yeah, well, and thanks for doing it because I spent a lot of time in Wyoming this year. I've probably spent, I don't know, a month in Wyoming and in the capital for a couple weeks and getting to know the legislators. You have the Freedom Caucus members, we have our Hazlitt Coalition members. There's probably an 80-90% overlap there. So it's been a joy to kind of work with you and talk about what's going on and meeting everybody. But I'm just like stymied. I'm befuddled with what is happening in Wyoming right now, watching all these great policy wins and then seeing like this unusual backlash to see that there's like this anti-freedom caucus movement in Wyoming, this deep red state with all these conservative voters that I would have to think want less government, which is like the unifying thing behind conservative movement, liberty movement, whatever you want to call it. So I thought we got to get you on. We got to talk about what are these wins? Like what's been happening in Wyoming over these last couple of years?
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction. And it's the truth. Wyoming is a deeply red state. The people of the state are patriots. They're conservative. They want the government to leave them alone. And over the past 6 or 8 election cycles, we have really seen the voters giving the establishment Republicans the boot. The conservative coalition in the Wyoming House, just 10 years ago, there were about 6. And then it grew to 8, and then it grew to 18, and then 32. And now there's a slim conservative majority in the Wyoming House of Representatives. And so now, for the first time, we've finally been able to see some huge conservative wins. And the one that comes, top of mind is property tax relief.
Yeah.
During the COVID years, there were a lot of people who moved into the state of Wyoming, paid cash for houses, and sent the housing market into just this skyrocketing explosion. And so the way that the property tax system works in Wyoming, which I'm sure it's similar in a lot of other states, is that I pay property taxes on the value of my house every single year, and that value goes up when someone from California purchases the house next to me for cash. And
Right.
so I'm paying taxes on unrealized gains. We've got people in the state that are taxed out of their homes, people on fixed incomes who are retired, who can no longer afford to live in their home because they are essentially paying rent to the government. So one of the things that the Freedom Caucus really championed was a 25% property tax cut for all Wyoming homeowners. It was a hard-fought win. We tried it in 2023. The governor vetoed it. We tried it again after we gained a majority in the House and got it across the finish line in 2024. So that's a huge win that we're really proud of, and that I know that the people of Wyoming are feeling it. I'm feeling it. I can spend more money on groceries for my kids, and money's fungible. I'd rather spend it on kids than send it to the government,
Right.
who mysteriously doesn't use it to fix the potholes outside my house.
Right, right. I mean, I'm jealous that you guys have that. I'm in Minnesota. I don't know, my property taxes are $7,000-8,000 a year. We put our kids through private school. So it's like I'm paying for all these other things, these other kids to go to school when I'm footing the bill for my own kids to get an education. And it's infuriating. And, we do stuff nationally. And I've talked to people, legislators in Ohio, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, South Dakota, Montana, certainly Wyoming. The biggest issue across the whole country is property taxes. And when the federal government is out there doing their inflationary, monetary policy and bidding up the prices of these homes, we're all feeling that pinch. And I love the way you put it. It's like you're renting from the darn government and you never actually own your home. If there's always a threat of them taking it from you because you haven't paid taxes for whatever it is, it changes by state, a year, 2 years. That's insane. That's not property ownership. And this whole country was founded upon private property rights.
Absolutely. And that's why we targeted the relief to all homeowners. There was an attempt to carve out certain individuals, based on income or what have you. And we were really adamant that this should apply to all residential homeowners in the state of Wyoming. And another thing that the caucus really pushed in the realm of property tax relief was also a 50% long-term property tax cut for long-term homeowners in the state of Wyoming. These are
Awesome.
the folks living on fixed incomes, 65 and older, who have paid property taxes in the state of Wyoming for 25 years or more.
So I'm hearing that people, if they know about it, which it sounds like a lot of people don't even know this is a thing. But if they do know about it, I've heard there's confusion. How the heck do they get it? Is it automatic? Do they apply? Like, how does that work?
So this year we learned that the Department of Revenue and the county assessors did nothing to promote the property tax relief. Wonder why? Probably because they like to gobble up the revenue and use it for projects. And so the conservatives in the legislature, took it upon themselves, used their own cash, their own hard-earned income to send postcards, to do advertising, to let their constituents know you can get this property tax relief. And it got confusing, and I think intentionally so. These government agencies want to make it confusing to get your property tax relief. They want to make it easy to receive other benefits from the government, but they want to make it a little bit more tricky to receive your hard-earned money back in the form of a property tax exemption. So it's very convoluted in how homeowners can apply. If there was even some confusion about the deadline. Some county assessors were saying it was May. Some county assessors were saying March. And so there was confusion across the state, across the 23 counties, as to how to, get this thing done for yourself.
So I've got a screenshot here. So can you walk us through this? Because this is at least how to get the 25% exemption that I love applies to everybody, because in most states, certainly my home state, if the government's going to do anything for us, they have income caps, or if you make more than this much money, too bad, you're gonna have to pay for everybody else to have this benefit. So kudos to you, the Freedom Caucus, for driving this thing forward and make it eligible for everybody. But what are we looking at here? Can you walk us through these steps?
Absolutely. So for the 25% property tax cut, and again, this is the one that applies to all homeowners, regardless of age and the amount of time that they've paid property taxes. This one can be applied for online, which is really, really nice. So a Wyoming homeowner just visits, you can just Google it. It actually comes up pretty easily, but you go to the Wyoming Residential Affidavit Claim Portal, which is a offshoot of the Department of Revenue website. And there you just submit an affidavit certifying that you are a resident, you own your home, you reside in your home at least 8 months out of the year. And again, there was confusion about the deadline. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but the application is open from October through March for every single tax year. So for homeowners that want to receive this awesome tax cut and benefit, in October, it will open for the next tax year for them to fill out the affidavit. If you do it on October 1st, you're good for the next tax year.
What about folks that are looking to move to Wyoming? Is there a certain number of years you have to have a residency to be eligible for this 25% exemption? Or is it, hey, I've been here for maybe more than 8 months, since that looks like, the initial requirement? Or how many years or months do you have to live in Wyoming to get this benefit?
So for the 25% property tax cut, there's no durational residency requirement. As long as you've lived here for the 8 months or basically, a year, and then you have the proof that you've lived here 8 months out of the year, you're a full-time Wyoming resident, you can benefit from the 25% tax cut.
Awesome. That's great stuff. And before we get to this 50%, I just have to comment on what you said there, because, before we started, doing this, we were talking about how wildly different it is by state. And in my home state, I can't turn on the radio, I can't turn on the TV without some sort of state of Minnesota commercial. Get your welfare benefits, get your paid family medical leave, get hooked on the government goodies. I mean, they're spending, I should look it up sometime, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions a year, pushing their government handouts. But of course, like you pointed out, when it's, hey, let's get off of government dependency, let's have less revenue coming in, I doubt they're spending any money promoting this massive win that I believe is the biggest tax cut in the history of the state. Is that true?
It's so true that the government loves to spend money advertising the ways that it can get people hooked on dependency. When you're dependent on the government, you have less liberty. A good example of this is when the governor rolled out his budget for the year. I don't know how much he spent, but he had several slick drone footage, glitzy video advertisements showing off his budget proposal, which contains all of these, welfare assistance programs that take people's liberty away from them in exchange for government funds, which again, they're just our funds. The government doesn't have its
Yeah.
own money. And yeah, the 25% tax cut, I don't think we've ever seen a tax cut that large in my memory in Wyoming.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'd have to imagine is certainly to the best of my knowledge, it's the biggest. I can't imagine a more bold action has been taken in certainly recent memory. It's so unusual, despite all these campaign promises we hear year after year from largely the same people. We're going to cut government. We're going to cut the budget. We're going to cut spending, lower taxes. And then most of these people get into office and they don't touch any of those campaign promises. They grow the budget. Maybe at best they don't increase taxes, but oftentimes they come up with little, goodies to say, well, we have to do this. We need to have a this little tax, or we're going to pin the gas tax to the rate of inflation. But that's not a tax increase because we don't control inflation. So they come up with all sorts of little schemes to bring in more revenue to the state.
They do. They love to bring in new user fees for
Mhm.
certain things and, disguise things that are taxes, but they like to just rename them fee or whatever, what have you. And it's funny that you mentioned what they say on the campaign trail. A lot of these insiders, these longtime incumbents, they do campaign as limited government fiscal hawks. And then when they get to Cheyenne, they assume that the people aren't watching because the people
Oh,
are
yeah.
working and the people have families and lives. And when true conservative patriots get to Cheyenne and they get on the House floor or the Senate floor and they discuss these same things, we need to cut taxes, we need to slow the growth of government, they're accused by the insiders of campaigning. And so that's very telling to me, when you're talking about the principles that got you elected in the actual chamber, they see that as campaigning. Whereas, the members of the Freedom Caucus and our conservative allies that's just follow through.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like, and I'm curious how you define establishment, but I always define it as the people who benefit from government largesse. And note, that includes Republicans and Democrats for that matter. These people, like the establishment, in their mind, there's two completely different seasons. You have legislative season, where you are tasked to govern and you must compromise all your values away. And then you have the campaign season, where, yes, I make all these promises to earn a vote, but then when legislative season kicks in, they ignore all of those promises and they just, do the easy things. It's easy to grow government. It's far easier to just grow the budget and splash out more goodies when 99% of the lobbyists out there are lobbying for a bigger budget and more goodies. So it is so rare to see a state and a chamber, the entire House, having an actual conservative majority who are delivering on the types of results that I'm clamoring for as a conservative voter, and conservatives all across this country are clamoring for and demanding from their legislatures, whether it's in the state or it's the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. So I just want to commend you guys for actually having the courage, because that's what it takes, is a tremendous amount of political courage to actually do what you told people you would do. It's so rare.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head in that in Wyoming and probably everywhere else, a lot of the fights don't come down to Republican versus Democrat. It comes down to who these people that are elected actually think they're representing. And there's a contingency in the Wyoming legislature who truly believe that they were sent to Cheyenne to represent the government. And that's why these property tax relief bills were such a hard fight, because there are a lot of legislators, Republican and Democrat, who believe that their number one job is to collect revenue for the local governments, the state government, county governments, whatever. And then there's the rest of the legislature. They believe rightly that they were sent to represent the people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fights about local control this, local control that. There's no more local control than just the people themselves.
Yeah. I tell everybody, we do all these trainings. I talk to folks all the time. In fact, we've got a big convention coming up in Cincinnati in 2 weeks, and I'm tasked with doing some breakout sessions with some of these college students. And I'm sure I'm going to impart this upon them that everybody in politics, especially elected officials, have to ultimately decide, who will you serve? Will you serve the people that put you there, or will you serve the establishment, the state, the government? And you can only serve one master. And that's so important for anybody who's even thinking of running for office or getting involved in politics. Who will you serve? Because you can only serve one master. Unfortunately, I would say 95% of elected officials choose to serve the status quo, the establishment, the state, government, whatever you want to call it. But how do you define establishment? I'm always fascinated with how people define establishment.
I think in Wyoming, I would define the establishment as just the good old boys club that has kind of been running the show for the past 3 or 4 decades. And, you know, 30 years ago, it might have been a mix of Democrats and Republicans, and nowadays they're more Republicans. But again, the party affiliation thing is just a formality here.
Yeah.
And if I can speak frankly and off the cuff, I think the establishment, they are people, like you said, they benefit from government largesse. They are people who have been in government and been just dependent on the government in terms of their own income for
Mhm.
their entire lives. They are not the everyday, Wyoming man and woman that are out working, whether that be, a contractor or a rancher or a landman or whatever. These are the people that have just been pining for power for their entire lives. A lot of times in Wyoming, they're kind of born into the political life, if you will. And these people, they are very threatened by just normal people running for office. And
Yeah.
that was the entire purpose of the way our constitution and our legislature was set up. We're a citizen legislature.
Mhm.
It's why we have such short sessions, and they're kind of in a weird time of the year. It was meant to allow people to take a break from their lives, but not too long of a break, so that
Yeah.
they can not become untethered from their lives and then become, the perfect kind of citizen legislator. But since, over the past 5 or 6 decades, that's just grown and grown and grown. And the amount of time that legislators spend is growing and growing. The amount of bills they're churning out, growing government, growing regulations, increasing spending, raising fees. And so I just think there's people that have benefited for years off the system, the status quo. And there's finally just normal people deciding to rise up, serve their communities in the legislature, and that really challenges the status quo that we've had.
Yeah. I totally agree. To me, another way to define it would be the people who put their political ambitions above the whole reason they ran for office, and certainly above their campaign promises. And I've met people. In fact, I've met a person in the gallery in Cheyenne as I was sitting and overseeing the House on like the first or second day of session. And I don't remember this person's name. It doesn't matter. He's a staffer. And I asked him, you seem like you maybe want to run for office someday. This person's probably 24, 25. And this person said, yeah, it's kind of like it's my family's industry. My dad served in the state house and in the state senate. So yeah, I'm just going to keep, doing the thing that my family does. And I just kind of walked away from this kid, really thinking that is exactly the type of person who should not be anywhere near power. You want to have power just because it's your family industry? That's a disgusting incentive to want to serve in public office.
And the media loves people like that. Here in Wyoming, it's no different than anywhere else. In fact, I think it can be worse than a lot of other places. And we have a Bernie Sanders supporter who's running as a Republican for U.S. Senate. And he is the nephew of a former governor and like the grandson of like a mayor or something like that.
Yeah.
And when he announced his race, the regime press called him a son of Wyoming politics. Just drooling over him.
Oh, so gross.
And that's just, perfect example of the way that the left-wing media just loves this status quo insider,
Yeah.
heirs to power that they think deserve the power just because of their last name.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this 50% property tax exemption, because I thought this was a ballot initiative that still had to get passed this November. But is that not the case?
So that's a different
Oh,
mechanism of property tax relief, which is a really fun one to talk about. So the legislature passed a 50% property tax exemption for long-term Wyoming property owners. And so that one is available to Wyoming residents 65 years or older. And they had to have lived in Wyoming and paid residential property tax for 25 total years. They don't have to be consecutive. They could have lived here for 10 years and then 20 years later. So
hmm,
this one, the other aspects of it are similar to the 25%. The only difference is that you have to be 65 years or older and have paid property taxes for 25 years. And this one, again, this was an act of the legislature. There was a sunset date on it. And then after the Freedom Caucus gained a House majority, we slapped that off of there. There's no more sunset. And this is a great bill for those people that I had mentioned earlier that are living on fixed incomes and are being taxed out of their homes. There was a story of a woman up in Sheridan who was retired. She was living out her years in beautiful Sheridan, Wyoming, and she had to go back and wait tables and take up a job in her retirement so that she could pay her property taxes. And that's just not right. She's owned her home her entire life, and that bill is meant for those people. There is a separate 50% property tax cut for all homeowners on the table, and that is going to be on the ballot in November.
okay. So, quick question for you. If you didn't have these conservative folks in the legislature, the Freedom Caucus didn't exist, the Hazlitt Coalition members didn't exist, do you think any of this stuff becomes law?
No,
Yeah.
there's not a chance. The Freedom Caucus and the Hazlitt members and the conservative allies, the entire bloc, they're solely responsible for driving these issues. And some folks will say, and these are the insider types, they'll say that property taxes aren't a Wyoming issue. They're a national issue that were dropped in, that was just plucked in from somewhere else and dropped into the state. If you go and talk to people at their doors, they will tell you they have been suffering under crushing property taxes. And maybe it's caused by national actors and reckless spending in Washington and inflationary policies, but they're Wyoming issues through and through.
Yep.
And these are the people, these conservatives, they are the ones that take these things from the people and drive them in Cheyenne. We would never have seen even the idea of a 25% cut, let alone, we probably wouldn't even have seen something like a 10% cut come out of the insider block. This is truly a conservative agenda item that has been pushed.
What about school choice? I think was it Representative Ocean Andrew? I think he was the champion behind this big school choice push. Can you talk about what does that one look like?
So we've been pushing for universal school choice in Wyoming for many years, and it's been another just hard fought battle. And again, it's been the conservatives really just pushing this issue and the insiders resisting any change when it comes to education. This bill has been brought several times. It's been stalled out. And then finally in 2024, we were able to successfully pass a limited school choice program. And it might have been 2023. So let me say that again, and then we can check.
Sure.
And in 2023, we were able to pass a limited school choice program that was limited based on income tiers, which is not what conservatives believe in. We believe that a child's income, a child's parents' income should not determine, what school they get to go to.
Yeah.
And neither should their zip code or the neighborhood that they live in. So we were able to enact, again, limited school choice, income tiered. And then the very next year after we gained members, we took the income tiers out. And now that's the law in the state of Wyoming. This last year, before that program went into implementation, the teachers union sued and got that program blocked. And so there was an injunction in place over the last year. Last month, the Wyoming Supreme Court actually ruled that the case or the program can go on running while the litigation is pending. So the application is actually open now for families to apply for the $7,000 education savings account. They just have to go to the Wyoming Department of Education website, and they can apply for those funds. And that's really important. It applies to brick and mortar private schools, but then it can also be used for homeschool curriculum, online education. So it really opens the door for Wyoming families in a way that we've never had access to before.
That's awesome. And then again, That's another policy win that I know I'm sitting here in Minnesota, and yeah, we are nowhere near Wyoming. That is a fact. But even states like South Dakota, Missouri, Montana, like these other red states, they're like begging and like clamoring for these outcomes. And here you guys are doing it. And so I'm shocked with some of this anti-Freedom Caucus sentiment that I see while following all these social media pages. What do you think is the root of that?
I think that we're seeing a very loud minority of folks on these social media pages and things that are seeing the actual shift in Wyoming's governance, and they don't like it one bit. And it's because that good old boys insider establishment, they've been running the show for a long time, and it was a very comfortable place for these very, very far left people. They're actually quite close with these insiders in the way that they run things. And so as they see the state legislature finally reflect, the temperature of the people of Wyoming, they're unhappy. The funny thing about the education savings account lawsuit, the teachers union sued, and one of the biggest things that they got slapped down on by the Supreme Court is that they were unable to prove that there was an injury to anyone. And of course there's not. How could there be an injury to anybody by letting a family have school choice? It actually benefits everyone. A rising tide raises all ships. If you pull 3 or 4 kids out of a setting that they do not thrive in, every student's different, every kid thrives in a different setting, you're creating more time for a teacher to have one-on-one instructional time with more kids that are in that public setting. And so it's just a funny, testament to the fact there's no injury by providing more freedom.
Yes, I love that. There's no injury in providing more freedom. I might steal that.
Yeah, go
What
ahead.
what about, so there's another, I mean, property taxes, huge national issue. School choice, the failing government schools. Imagine if it's even possible that we didn't have government schools anywhere in this country. Imagine somebody, likely some, liberal saying, "You know what we need? We need government schools because that's going to be the solution." I would really hope that people, certainly in Wyoming, I don't know about Minnesota so much, would say, whoa, 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 the government is like never succeeded at anything. There's no profit motive. There's no motive to be, efficient or effective or have like a good outcome. Why on earth would we ever have government schools? But of course, we've had them for hundreds of years and they're in so many different states' constitutions. So, but I just like to think, well, what if we didn't? Like, who would actually think this is a good idea? Let's have government, train our kids or educate our kids. I don't think many people would.
Well, and like you said, a government monopoly on anything
Yeah.
always tends to be not very good.
Yeah.
And Wyoming does have public education enshrined in our Constitution. And because our members take their oath of office very seriously, we want it to be the very, very best that it can be. And part of making it better is providing that choice for families. Competition makes everything better. And in a rural state like Wyoming, it's hard to inject a lot of competition into the monopolistic system. But what little that we can create, it's going to be better for everybody.
Yeah. What about, because then the third issue, I think, and people have been clamoring over this, and certainly the 2020 election, election integrity. I think that's a priority of the Freedom Caucus. What have you guys done? What are you looking to do?
So election integrity has been a huge priority for the people of Wyoming, for the Republican Party, for the grassroots. And so that's something that we've worked really hard with the Secretary of State, Chuck Gray. He's a founding member of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus and a Hazlitt member himself. And
Yep.
we've partnered with his office to get a lot of really groundbreaking things across the finish line. We were the first state and the strongest state to pass proof of citizenship and Wyoming residency in order to vote in our elections. We're calling it Wyoming's version of the SAVE Act, which Congress can't even get done. I'm not sure if there's even enough living senators to get that across the finish line at this point.
Right.
And we got it done in Wyoming in 2025. You have to provide actual hard proof that you are a United States citizen to vote, which is common sense. And then you have to provide proof that you're a resident of the state of Wyoming to vote.
Yeah.
So we did that. We also worked really hard on voter list maintenance, which sounds kind of boring. But one of our members, Ann Lucas, she worked with the Secretary of State's office to bring a really just clever bill that allows the Secretary of State's office to engage in data sharing with other state agencies. And that's resulted in removing like 4 or 5 illegal aliens off the rolls in Wyoming, or not illegal aliens or non-citizens, I should say, off the voter rolls in Wyoming. A lot of folks say, oh, that's a national issue. We don't have any voter fraud. Then we show them a few examples and they say, oh, well, that's not enough. Well, the Freedom Caucus believes that even one instance of an illegal vote cast is unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. What about forward looking? I think you guys have a couple other election integrity items that you're looking at.
Yeah, so for a few years now, we've been trying to ban ballot drop boxes to secure that chain of custody of the ballot. That ballot drop boxes are not actually even allowed under Wyoming law, but during COVID, the previous Secretary of State issued like a memorandum, which is not law, but he issued a memorandum saying, yeah, you guys can have drop boxes in your counties. And so we're trying to walk that back and create uniformity in all 23 counties, get rid of the drop boxes. And then we're also looking to ban ballot harvesting. That's another thing that, crazy enough, we still haven't done here in Wyoming.
So what do you say to the average person that's at least open-minded, but has heard this, oh, the Freedom Caucus are a bunch of terrible people? What do you say to that person?
You know, I would start by asking them what they've heard. And the reason that I would do that is because there is just a lot of noise out there. And a lot of it comes from the regime press, but a lot of it also just comes from different spiderweb activist Democrat groups that all share the same membership, but they're very savvy with their communications. And I would ask, you know, do you want to keep more of your money in your pocket? And I bet 9 times out of 10 people will say yes. You know, do you want to protect the integrity of our elections? Again, 9 times out of 10 people will say yes. And I think the easiest thing to do is just show the record of the Freedom Caucus. One of these groups that you, I think, are mentioning, there's this group of very liberal trial attorneys that started a political action committee. One of them was a Kamala Harris supporter, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton supporter. And they've started this organization, and they are putting billboards around the state that say, stop the Freedom Caucus agenda. Well, you know, I would say to these open-minded people, let's talk about the agenda, because it's what we've just discussed today. It's property tax relief. It's getting illegal aliens off of Wyoming highways. It's keeping girls safe in their sports. You know, it's just common sense, popular things. And so a lot of this negativity has to do with, I guess, innuendos, very vague, non-specific complaints. But if you get down into the weeds, the agenda that the Freedom Caucus has driven is very normal, very common sense, and it's widely supported.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, I'm sitting here jealous watching Wyoming become freer and freer while I'm in Minnesota. They're talking about, if the Democrats get elected, that what they're going to do is universal daycare. As if the daycare fraud we have isn't already running rampant enough. They want universal free daycare. So it is insane the direction that, you know, some states are going. And
we're not that far from pivoting that way, even in Wyoming. They tried to shoehorn universal daycare into the education savings account bill. So, I mean, it's imperative that conservatives, you know, continue to maintain this strong lead and leading the way on these policy fights, because we're not far from that in Wyoming, as scary as it sounds.
Yeah, that is kind of shocking. So what's like a call to action? If you know, someone in Wyoming's watching this thing, they're getting maybe a bit of a truth bomb thrown in their ear and in their face. Like what is the call to action to say, hey, you guys, you should be doing this thing? What's the thing?
You know, I would encourage people to just read. I think a really good place to start is the social media pages for the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. The caucus is on Facebook and X. But, you know, even aside from that, I believe that the people of Wyoming are smart enough to be discerning and to just read these bills when a group is coming out and saying that, you know, so-and-so voted to destroy Wyoming energy, and then they put a footnote of the bill. You know, go read the bill. And I think that the people of Wyoming are able to sift out kind of the crap from the truth. And that's what I'd invite them to do. The Wyoming legislature's website is actually extremely user-friendly. You can find amendments, you can find different versions of bills, you can find who voted what where. You can also go back on YouTube and watch the proceedings themselves. And so I just think the more information people have, the better. And we can just push back against kind of these cloudy, weird, deceptive, vague charges that are being thrown against
Yeah.
conservatives.
They come out of, well, maybe not nowhere, but they prop up all the time. We just saw a primary in Montana, and the names of these organizations that these individuals create are so deceptive. There was a group that was launched in Montana this spring called Conservatives for Montana, who were out there campaigning against all of the conservative candidates in Montana. So I'm assuming there's probably similar things happening in Wyoming where they get crafty, they come up with a name that nobody could disagree with. And when they see, oh, this is from, conservatives for whatever, Wyoming, I'm a conservative and I'm in Wyoming. Therefore, I must take everything they say as gospel. It's so shady.
Yeah, it's definitely a tactic of the left. It's how the Democrats took over Colorado. And so they're trying to implement it here. And I just think the people of Wyoming are smarter than that.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, the way I always try to end these things is just reminding folks. And if you don't know what I mean when I say this, please reach out. I'm happy to talk to you. But if you want to be politically heard in politics because you're sick and tired of being politically ignored, disrespected, if you want to be politically respected, you must be politically feared.